Let me ask you something that sounds almost too simple to be interesting. What do you actually do the month your mortgage is paid off? Not what you should do, not what a financial advisor tells you. I mean, what do most people actually do? Because here's what I've noticed. Nobody really talks about this moment. There are thousands of videos about how to pay off your mortgage faster. There are YouTube channels dedicated entirely to debt payoff screams. You know, the ones where someone holds up a piece of paper and cries. And I'm not making fun of that. That emotion is real. But what comes after that moment? What happens to the person, financially, psychologically, practically, in the months and years that follow? That's what almost nobody is discussing. And honestly, I think it's one of the most important financial conversations we're not having. Because the truth is, and I want you to sit with this, paying off your house doesn't just change your bank account. It changes the way you think about money. It changes what you feel you owe the world. It changes your relationship with your job, with risk, with time itself. And if you're not prepared for that shift, if you don't understand why it happens and what to do with it, you can actually end up in a worse place financially than you were before. Not broke, but directionless, which in the long run can cost you just as much. So today, we're not going to talk about how to pay off your house. We're going to talk about what happens after, what it feels like, what the math looks like, and how the people who handle this moment well are different from the ones who quietly waste it. No pressure, no hustle language, just an honest look at a life stage that doesn't get nearly enough attention. Let's get into it. Let's start with a name. Mark. Mark is 47 years old. He lives outside of Columbus, Ohio, though honestly, this story could be set in Leeds, England, or Lyon, France, or Stuttgart, Germany. The details change, but the shape of the story stays remarkably the same. Mark works in supply chain management. He makes around $78,000 a year before taxes. After federal and state taxes, after Social Security, after his health insurance premium, he takes home roughly $4,900 a month. That's his real number. That's what hits his checking account. He bought his house in 2009, during the dip after the financial crisis. Smart timing, honestly. He paid $187,000 for it, put 10% down, financed the rest over 30 years at a fixed rate of 5.25%. His monthly mortgage payment was $927. That included principal, interest, property taxes, and homeowners insurance rolled into escrow. For 15 years, that $927 left his account on the first of every month, automatically, without asking. It was just gone. Part of the furniture of his financial life. He also has a car payment, $340 a month on a 2021 Toyota Camry. He has a Visa card he keeps mostly under control, usually around $1,800 in balance. Minimum payment roughly $54. He pays a little extra when he can. He has no student loans. He finished paying those off back in 2018, which felt like a big deal at the time. His monthly expenses, roughly, mortgage, $927, car, $340, insurance, car and health supplements, about $180, utilities, $210, groceries, $480, subscriptions and phone, $95, credit card minimum plus a little extra, $150, some dining out and miscellaneous, $300. That's about $2,682 a month in committed and semi-fixed spending, which leaves him with roughly $2,218 per month for savings, retirement contributions, and whatever life throws at him. He's been putting $400 a month into his 401k, not enough to max it, but enough to get his employer match. He keeps a small emergency fund. He's not struggling, but he's not exactly thriving either. He's floating. And then, in the spring of this year, April to be exact, something happens. He makes his final mortgage payment. $927, gone, like every other month, except this time
It's the last time. He gets a letter from the bank 2 weeks later. Congratulations, lien released. The house is yours. Mark stares at that letter for a while. Then he puts it on the refrigerator. Then he goes to work. And here's where the story actually begins, because that $927 is still in his account, and for the first time in 15 years, nobody is asking for it. What does Mark do with it? What would you do with it?
Before we talk about the money, I want to talk about something that's harder to measure. Because the financial change is obvious, the psychological change is where it gets interesting. There's a concept in behavioral economics, and I'll keep this simple, called background anxiety. It's not the anxiety that keeps you up at night, it's the anxiety that just runs quietly in the background of your daily life. Like a fan you've had in your room for so long you stopped hearing it, until it turns off, and then the silence is almost disorienting. A mortgage is one of the most powerful sources of background anxiety in adult financial life. Not because it's loud, but because it's constant. It's there every first of the month. It's there when you're thinking about whether to change jobs. It's there when the economy starts looking shaky and you wonder if your position is safe. It's there in the back of your mind when your car needs a repair and you're doing that quick mental calculation. Okay, if I cover this, can I still cover that? It shapes decisions you don't even realize it's shaping. Mark, for example, stayed in a job he felt mildly dissatisfied with for 3 extra years, partly, not entirely, but partly, because the mortgage was sitting there. The monthly commitment created a kind of invisible gravity. It pulled him toward caution, toward stability, toward staying put. That's not entirely bad. Stability has value. But it does mean that for 15 years, some fraction of his energy, his decision-making, his risk tolerance was quietly influenced by a debt instrument. And in Europe, this pattern is equally familiar. A couple in Manchester paying £1,100 a month on a repayment mortgage. A young professional in Munich on a 25-year Bausparvertrag. A family in Bordeaux whose Crédit Immobilier runs until they're 62. The numbers differ, the weight feels the same. The weight isn't oppressive, it's just present, constant, and after enough years you stop feeling it consciously. You just factor it in. You build your life around it. So when it's gone, there's a moment, and almost everyone who has paid off a home describes something like this, where the absence of that weight feels a little strange. Some people describe it as lightness. Some describe it as weirdly quiet. Some, honestly, describe a kind of low-level anxiety about the absence of anxiety, like they've lost a reference point. And that psychological moment, that period of adjustment right after the mortgage is gone, is exactly when some of the most consequential financial decisions get made, for better or worse. Because suddenly, $927 a month is just sitting there, and the mind, having adapted to a certain level of constraint, starts looking for somewhere to put that energy. Sometimes it finds the right place. Often it doesn't. Okay, let's look at what actually happened to Mark's financial life the moment that mortgage ended. Not what could happen, what did happen, mathematically speaking, based on his real numbers. Before the payoff, Mark's financial picture looked like this. Monthly take-home, $4,900. Total committed expenses, $2,682. Monthly surplus, roughly $2,218. Of that surplus, $400 went to his 401k. $150 went to the credit card, which left him about $1,668 for real discretionary use, savings, fun, emergencies, repairs, life. That's not terrible, but it's not a lot of room to breathe either. One unexpected $3,000 expense, a new furnace, a medical bill, a car repair, would wipe out nearly 2 months of that breathing room. Now the mortgage is gone. Same take-home, $4,900. New committed expenses, $1,755. That's the same list minus the $927. New monthly surplus, $3,145. Just like that,
No raise, no promotion, no side hustle, no investment genius. Mark's monthly surplus went from $2,218 to $3,145, a difference of $927 per month, or about $11,124 per year. Now hold on, I want you to feel how significant this is. Because $11,124 a year is not a side hustle income. It's not some passive income strategy. It's just money that was always part of his income, quietly committed to a debt, now freed up. It existed before. He earned it. He just never got to decide what to do with it. Now he does. Let's take this further, because this is where the math gets genuinely important. If Mark is 47 now, he has roughly 18 years until the typical retirement age of 65. If he takes that $927 per month, all of it, and puts it into a standard index fund averaging a 7% annual return over 18 years, here's what happens. Monthly contribution, $927. Time, 18 years or 216 months. Average annual return, 7%. The future value of that, and you can run this yourself on any compound interest calculator, comes to approximately $438,000. $438,000 from one decision, from one freed-up payment. Now compare that to what happens if Mark does what a lot of people actually do, which is quietly inflate his lifestyle to absorb that $927 over time.
There's a concept in psychology called hedonic adaptation, and it's one of the most quietly powerful forces in your financial life. The basic idea is this: human beings are extraordinarily good at adapting to their circumstances, both good and bad. Give a person more money, and within a relatively short period of time, they adjust their baseline expectations upward, and the happiness bump fades. Take money away, and within time, people adapt downward too. Not always easily, but they do. This is why lottery winners, on average, are not significantly happier 2 years after winning than they were before. And it's also why people who've struggled financially for years sometimes report feeling, paradoxically, a strange calm. They've adapted to constraint. Now apply this to Mark's situation. For 15 years, Mark adapted to a life where $927 a month was simply not available to him. His lifestyle, his expectations, his daily spending habits, all calibrated around that reality. He didn't feel poor, he just built his life inside a certain fence. Then the fence disappears, and the mind, very naturally, very automatically, starts looking for a new fence to build. Because that's what we do. We fill available space. Financial, physical, psychological, we fill it. The $927 doesn't feel like a windfall. It doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like air. And what do you do with air? You breathe it, without thinking, without planning, without intention. So the car gets upgraded. Not dramatically, he doesn't buy a BMW, he just trades in the Camry for a slightly newer model with a slightly higher payment. $470 a month instead of $340. That's $130 more. Fine. The grocery budget quietly expands because, well, things are a little more relaxed, maybe another $80 a month. He starts getting a little lazier about the credit card balance, so it creeps up, another $40 a month in interest, roughly. A streaming service here, a gym membership there, a weekend trip that costs $800 instead of the $400 version. None of these things are catastrophic, none of them are wrong, strictly speaking, but added together over 6 to 12 months, Mark has unconsciously absorbed somewhere between $400 and $700 of that $927 back into his spending, not through recklessness, through drift, through the perfectly human tendency to expand into available space. And here's the real psychological trap that makes this worse. Because his house is paid off, Mark feels, for the first time in a long time, financially secure. And that feeling of security is actually real. He is more secure. He owns an asset free and clear. That's meaningful.
But that feeling of security can quietly become a justification for relaxing financial discipline. I've paid off the house, I've earned this, I can afford to ease up a little. And he's right, he can ease up a little. But a little has a way of becoming more than a little without you noticing, because each individual decision feels small. This is what I mean when I say you can end up in a worse place financially despite doing something financially significant. Not broke, but not meaningfully better off either, just comfortable. And comfortable has a way of becoming the ceiling instead of the floor. The people who handle this moment well, and I want to be clear, this is not a morality judgment, it's just an observation. The people who handle it well tend to share one trait. They treat the moment of payoff not as an arrival, but as a reallocation. The money was always going somewhere. Now it needs to go somewhere new, and they decide intentionally, before the drift sets in, where that somewhere is.
I want to be careful here because I'm not going to give you a list of things to do. That's not what this is. What I want to do instead is show you how the mindset is different, because that's where the real work is. Let me introduce you to someone who handled this moment differently. Her name is Diane. She's 51. She lives outside of Edinburgh, Scotland. She paid off her mortgage in her early 50s, earlier than expected, because she made one additional payment per year for most of her loan term. That single habit, by the way, cut nearly 4 years off her mortgage and saved her tens of thousands in interest. But that's a different video. When Diane's mortgage ended, she didn't feel celebratory. She felt strategic. That's just her personality. Not better, not worse, just different from Mark's. The first thing she did, and she told herself she would do this before the final payment was even made, was write down exactly what the payment had been. $890 a month. And she wrote a single question next to it. Where is this going now? Not a budget spreadsheet, not a financial plan document, just a question. One question, written on a Post-it note on her bathroom mirror. She sat with that question for about 3 weeks before making any changes, and in those 3 weeks, she noticed something. She noticed how many small spending decisions she made without really deciding. The extra glass of wine at a restaurant, the slightly nicer hotel room, the impulse online purchase. None of them significant alone, but she could see, for the first time with real clarity, how easily $890 could disappear without ever making a single conscious choice. So she made a rule for herself, not a strict budget, a rule. Any month where she didn't consciously decide where her $890 equivalent was going, it went automatically to her pension contributions and an ISA. Default to intentional. Spend only by choice, not by drift. And she gave herself permission to enjoy some of it. She decided, deliberately, that $200 a month was her quality of life money. No guilt, no justification required. The rest went to financial infrastructure, retirement, an investment account, and eventually a small rental property she purchased 6 years later with the accumulated capital. Now, I'm not telling you Diane's approach is the right one for everyone. It isn't. A 28-year-old who just paid off a small starter home has a completely different set of priorities and time horizons than a 51-year-old planning for retirement. Someone in Germany with a generous state pension has different calculations than someone in the U.S. with a 401k and Social Security uncertainty. Someone in their 40s with kids in university has different pulls on that money than someone whose kids are already grown. The details differ, but the underlying principle that intention beats drift every time, that holds across almost all situations. Here's what I've noticed about the people who handle this well. They don't necessarily invest more aggressively. They don't necessarily make brilliant financial moves. What they do is make deliberate ones. They close the gap between money is available and money has a purpose. That gap is where wealth quietly disappears, not through bad luck, not through bad investments, but through simple financial inertia. There's also something else worth noting. When people handle this transition well, when they redirect that money intentionally, something interesting happens to their relationship with their job. Because here's a quiet truth about having significant financial obligations. They create a kind of dependency on your income that subtly influences your behavior at work. You're less likely to push back on something that bothers you, less likely to take a risk on a new opportunity, less likely to walk away from a situation that isn't serving you. Not because you're a coward, but because the math doesn't give you room. When the mortgage is gone and the freed up money is building in a meaningful account, that math changes, slowly, but it changes. You start to feel the very early edges of what some people call financial optionality, the ability to make choices based on what you actually want rather than what your fixed expenses demand. That's not a fantasy, it's a math problem, and it starts solving itself the moment you stop letting that money drift.
I want to end this by coming back to Mark. Because Mark is still on that refrigerator moment. The letter is still up there. He's still figuring it out. And I don't want to tell you that Mark made a perfect decision. He didn't. Not immediately. He did upgrade his car sooner than he should have. He did spend a few months just drifting a little, enjoying the extra room. He's human. That's normal. But 6 months after his final payment, he sat down one evening and did the math I walked you through earlier, and it shook him. Not in a frightening way, but in the way that clear information sometimes shakes you. The way a good map shakes you when you realize you've been walking in the wrong direction, and the right direction is actually just right there. He didn't overhaul his life. He didn't watch 12 finance YouTube videos in one night and open 7 new accounts. He made 2 changes. He increased his 401k contribution from $400 a month to $900 a month, close to the maximum for his age bracket. And he opened a simple index fund account and set up a $300 automatic transfer on the first of every month. That's it. That was his plan. Not complicated, not exciting, just intentional. The remaining 100-something, he honestly can't account for it exactly. It probably went toward groceries and the occasional dinner out. And that's fine. That's a real life. But those 2 changes alone, run forward over 18 years with reasonable market assumptions, represent a genuinely different retirement. Not a rich one necessarily, but a free one. A retirement where the house is paid off, the investment accounts have meaningful weight, and the number of decisions driven by financial obligation rather than actual preference is very, very small. That's the quiet life nobody talks about. It's not flashy. There's no moment where Mark becomes wealthy in the dramatic sense. There's just a gradual accumulation of freedom. Small, steady, unspectacular, and profoundly real. And the thing that made it possible wasn't genius, it wasn't luck, it wasn't a raise or windfall or a brilliant investment call. It was just one moment of clarity, one evening with a calculator, one decision not to let the drift win. That's really what this video is about. Not mortgages specifically, not index funds or 401ks or retirement math. It's about the gap between a financial event and a financial decision. That gap, that space between something changing in your numbers and you actually choosing what to do with it, is where the real work of building a stable life happens. Most of us will face a version of Mark's moment at some point. Maybe it's a mortgage, maybe it's a student loan finally going to zero. Maybe it's a car that gets paid off and suddenly $340 a month is just sitting there. Maybe it's a raise that feels like it should change things, but somehow never quite does. Whatever the form it takes, that gap is worth paying attention to. That gap is worth thinking about before the drift fills it. Because once the drift fills it, it's not gone. It's just much quieter about where it went. If you watched this far, thank you. Genuinely. These are the kinds of conversations I think are worth having. Not because they're exciting, but because they're real. If this gave you something to think about, a like or subscribe helps more people find videos like this. And if you have your own version of Mark's moment, paid off something significant, or on your way to it, I'd be curious what you did with that space. The comments are open. Take care of yourselves, and take care of your money. Not obsessively, but thoughtfully. See you in the next one.